Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on how we all communicate at work. You know, every office, every single team runs on a set of invisible rules. We're going to dig into the historical blueprints that design those rules, and it's all based on Catherine Miller's incredible work, Organizational Communication.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. I want you to think about your workplace for a second. Is it predictable? Super efficient? A place where every person, every part just moves in perfect sync to get things done? Well, for a really long time, that wasn't just some lofty goal. It was seen as the only way to run a successful organization.
And that whole idea brings us to our very first blueprint, what we call the classical approach. This was pretty much the original design for the modern workplace, and it looked at organizations through a really specific and honestly a very powerful lens.
At the very core of this blueprint was something called the machine metaphor. This idea, which completely dominated the early 20th century, saw a company not as a group of people, but as this finely tuned machine. Think about it. Every part has one single job, every part is replaceable, and the whole thing is designed to run the same way every single time. Predictable.
And the architects of this machine were thinkers like Henri Fayol and Frederick Taylor. They laid out the plans, a super rigid division of labor, a strict top-down hierarchy they called the scalar chain, which just means orders flow from the boss to the next person down and so on, and this core belief that you could scientifically find the single one best way to do any task. Efficiency was king. That was it.
And this shows you exactly how communication was supposed to work. It was a one-way street, period. All information, all orders, they just flowed from the top down. It was formal, it was usually written, and it was laser-focused on one thing: getting the job done. No confusion, no chit-chat.
So, what about all the communication we kind of take for granted now? Chatting with a coworker about your weekend, or maybe an amazing idea from somebody working on the factory floor. Well, in this classical blueprint, that stuff was seen as a bug, an error in the system. It was just a distraction that made the machine less efficient.
But here's the thing. The huge, massive flaw in the design. The machine was built out of people. And people, unlike cogs and gears, well, we have feelings, we have needs, we have relationships. The classical blueprint had this enormous blind spot. And it wasn't just impractical. You could argue it was an ethical failure. It just completely ignored the human element.
Now, that critical oversight, it didn't go unnoticed forever. The realization that you just can't treat people like machine parts, it sparked a total revolution in how people thought about management. And that leads us straight to our second blueprint, the human relations approach.
And the real catalyst, the spark for this huge shift, came from a series of experiments back in the 20s and 30s that had some really surprising results. They're now famous, they're called the Hawthorne studies, and they basically changed everything. So these researchers go into the Hawthorne factory, they think they're going to find that stuff like better lighting improves productivity. But what they actually discovered was way more profound. It turned out that social stuff, like just feeling valued or being part of a team, or management just paying attention to you, had a huge impact on performance. We now call this the Hawthorne effect. People work better when they know someone's paying attention.
And what's so cool about this slide is how it perfectly captures this change in thinking. Douglas McGregor summed it up with his Theory X and Theory Y. We went from that classical Theory X view, that people are basically lazy and you have to control them, to the human relations Theory Y view, that people are actually motivated, they're creative, and they want to do good work if you just treat them with respect.
But of course, this story doesn't stop there. Just keeping your workers happy wasn't the final answer. So let's jump to the next step in the evolution, which builds on this idea, the human resources approach.
The human resources approach took the ideas from human relations and pushed them even further. It argued that, yeah, employees are social creatures who need to feel good, but they're also resources. They're these incredible reservoirs of knowledge, of creativity, of ideas that, if the organization could just tap into them, could be its single greatest asset.
And this table just lays out the whole journey perfectly. You can see it right there. Communication content went from being just about the task to including social stuff, to finally valuing innovation. And the direction? It went from being strictly top-down to flowing in basically all directions. The entire communication landscape just got completely redrawn. So the big question is, why does any of this history matter today? Well, because these blueprints, they were never totally thrown out. If you look really closely at your own job, you'll see that we're all living in this hybrid world, built from the pieces of all three of these approaches.
Seriously, think about it. That super detailed employee handbook filled with rules and procedures, that is pure classical thinking. The annual company picnic designed to make everyone feel good and boost morale, that's a direct legacy of human relations. And that weekly brainstorming meeting where everyone's encouraged to throw out ideas, that's the human resources approach in action. Our workplaces are just this big mashup of these powerful ideas.
And that's our explainer. So now think about your own job. Which one of these blueprints feels the most familiar? Is your company's main operating system more classical, more relations, or more resources? Because understanding these fundamental designs, it gives you a whole new lens to see exactly why your organization communicates the way it does.